Why this mother was removed from her plane will leave you dumbfounded. When Peggy Ewell woke up that day, she knew she had a flight to catch, so she picked up all her stuff and headed towards the airport without the slightest idea of what would happen next. She reached the Chicago's Midway International Airport, checked in, placed herself in her seat, buckled her seatbelt, but then something unusual occurred. Instead of taking off, the plane returned to the gate. No one knew what was happening at the time, and when suddenly a stewardess approached Ewell and told her to leave the plane, the reason would shock Peggy and completely change all her plans. Some people are afraid of heights, so they never travel by plane. Others simply don't believe planes to be safe, so they rather travel by car, even though the number of plane accidents is actually way lower than the number of car crashes. Peggy Ewell is not one of those two types of people because she used to love traveling by plane until this particular day when she was told to get off the plane for no obvious reason. She was shocked. This was not the first time Peggy traveled by plane, so she was well familiar with the protocol. She turned off her phone, fastened her seatbelt, made sure all her personal stuff was safely stored and that nothing was left in the aisle. Still, something seemed to be wrong. Of course, and all the other passengers already did everything they were supposed to do, the same way Peggy did, so the plane was supposed to take off, but yet it didn't. Peggy Ewell was on this plane because she wanted to avoid the long travel from Chicago to Cleveland by car. The actual traveling time by car on this relation is around 6 hours, and by plane, she could reach Cleveland, Ohio within 80 minutes. She had no clue that this time the traveling time would be changed, or perhaps there would be no traveling at all. The moment she realized the plane was returning to the gates, she thought the flight was canceled for weather-related reasons or something along those lines. When the plane returned to the gates, everyone was confused because they didn't know what was going on, and the lack of information raised many questions. Is the flight postponed? Are we going to fly anytime soon? Are we all supposed to leave the plane immediately? Is there a bomb? Still, none of the passengers got any of the answers to their questions, and only one person was kindly asked to leave the plane. This led Ewell to believe she was accidentally on the wrong plane. The name of the airport Ewell was at is Midway International Airport. It was opened back in 1927 and was a very busy one before they built the new one, the O'Hare International Airport. Generally, when accidents or unpleasant situations happen, it doesn't matter which place you are at, but when planes or flying is involved, it definitely matters. The unpleasant situations on flights can cause trauma with people due to the feeling that you're trapped in the air and you cannot ask the driver or pilot to stop the plane so you could leave. Just imagine how you would feel if someone came up to you and told you to get off of the plane immediately. What would be the first thing that would come to your mind? Of course, if all the passengers were asked to deplane, it would be a different situation. But this time, only Peggy Ewell was asked to leave, and it was strange for her. Of course, the first thing Ewell thought was that she had boarded the wrong plane, but how come it wasn't obvious before she reached her seat? And how come only now the flight attendants realized they boarded one extra passenger? It's interesting to know that Peggy Ewell was not the first passenger who was asked to get off a plane immediately. In fact, in Chicago, this happens every once in a while. Have you heard of the United Airlines scandal from 2017 when a person by the name of David Dow Diane was removed forcibly from his flight? This happened on the United Airlines plane when 4 crew members had to get on that flight and none of the already boarded passengers wanted to give up their place. The Vietnamese-American doctor was practically expelled from the plane even though he was a great passenger. He was quiet, he turned off his phone, and his seatbelt was properly fastened. Then why did the police have to intervene? When the United Airlines officials talked to the reporters, they said that Dow was behaving inappropriately, but that simply wasn't true. There are some recordings made by the passengers that circulated social networks showing Dow's behavior. He wasn't doing anything wrong. What really happened was that 4 of the airline staff members had to be on that plane and none of the passengers wanted to give up their seats. Then the person in charge randomly picked 4 people who were told they had to leave the plane immediately. One of those 4 people was a doctor, a Vietnamese-American pulmonologist who had an important surgery to handle in the morning. He simply didn't want his patient to die because of the airline's irresponsibility. Those people who were on the plane and didn't have to leave the flight had no idea what was going on when they heard the noise. Later on, when they saw the video on social media, they were terrified by the cruelty of the plane's security officers. If the staff only heard the doctor's reasoning in regards as to why he was so insistent on staying on board, maybe they would understand him and leave him alone. But still, they didn't ask him anything. He was simply ordered to leave and was forced to do so. It has become a frequent situation that a passenger has to be removed for a plane. Usually, it's due to unacceptable behavior, which is understandable. There are protocols and rules that have to be followed in order for chaos to be avoided. Could you imagine how it would look if all the people on a plane did exactly what they wanted, breaking the rules? 2 years ago, on a flight from Chicago to Houston, a female passenger became agitated and started behaving inappropriately after a stewardess politely asked her to close her tray table. Her aggressive behavior caused her to be removed from that flight. This story might have ended differently if there wasn't 4 witnesses, the co-passengers who told their side of the story. So when this woman claimed she was expelled for no reason, a witness explained what the problem was. After all, the flight attendants were there for a good reason, to make sure everyone on the plane is treated properly and equally, and that no one makes a mess or breaks the basic rules. That's simply their job, to make passengers traveling as pleasant as possible. No passenger complained when their flight was postponed for about an hour once they were sure the troublemaking woman was outside of the plane. After all, no one wants to travel under huge stress caused by a woman who is hateful, arrogant, and noisy. The moment they saw she was escorted from the plane, they felt relief because she was really rude and even racially abusive. The plane had to be returned to the gate, but no one complained as long as the uncivil woman was kept away from them. The official statement issued by Southwest Airlines and published in the Daily Mail after the incident said, "The customer became unruly and verbally abusive towards our flight attendants, and the decision was made to return to the gate to deplane the customer, where she was met by local law enforcement officers." On a plane, safety procedures are everything, and if only one person decides to ignore them, then all the passengers on that flight, together with the plane staff, might have huge problems to deal with. About a year ago, Southwest Airline had a problem with the attitude of a passenger who didn't like the fact that his flight was delayed for a few hours due to a maintenance and fueling issue. Of course, no one likes unexpected delays, especially when we're in a hurry or in pain. Still, if a delay happens, no one has the right to make a scene. After all, it is no one's fault when the unexpected delays are in question. While the passengers waited patiently in the line, the airline staff had to make sure all of the passengers were hydrated, so they were handing out bottles of water. One of the passengers, who probably wanted to crack a joke, said they better serve him vodka. The flight attendant, who didn't find this remark funny, approached this passenger and said, "I don't think that, and I didn't like your joke." If the situation wasn't already tense, maybe this joke would simply be ignored, but apparently even this crew member was irritated by the delay. Peter Uzelak, who was also on this flight, described the event in detail in his interview to KTXL. He said that even his wife had to intervene. He said that the flight attendant didn't like the joke, but he thought it was obviously made as an attempt to lower the tension. It wasn't completely clear why this flight attendant reacted the way they did in the first place. After all, a light joke couldn't harm anyone. A rude passenger is a common thing, but not a rude flight attendant, right? Apparently, in this particular example, both the flight attendant and the passenger were rude, or maybe one bad behavior provoked the other. What we could read from the interview was that when Peter Uzelak's wife said to the flight attendant, "Look, we've been on this plane for hours," the attendant replied, "Well, so have I, so get used to it." Not an answer we would expect, right? Apologies are all we usually get from airlines when something unpredictable or unpleasant happens on flights. They rarely offer something like money or flight compensations. In this situation, when this person was removed from the flight just because he irritated a flight attendant by making a bad joke, all we got was a public statement saying, "We regret any less than positive experience a customer has on board our aircraft. We welcome over 100 million customers each year, and we aim to maintain the comfort of all while delivering Southwest hospitality." It's a well-known rule that everyone has to turn off their phones after boarding a plane, regardless of the airline company. Not even when there's an emergency, no one can turn on their phone. This is precisely what happened when a woman who boarded a Southwest Airlines flight had an emergency call just before the flight for her husband. She wasn't allowed to call him back and was forced to turn her phone off. After all, she was on a plane, so there was no way she could help him, right? What really happened on the phone call that day was that the husband of a woman named Karen Momsen Evers called her to say that he was going to take his own life. After she got that message from him, she was forced to turn her phone off. When the plane took off, she kindly asked the plane staff to allow her to make an emergency call in case her husband was serious. What would you do in such a horrible situation? The worst case scenarios probably came into her mind. Upon receiving such a disturbing call from her husband, Karen Momsen Evers was deeply troubled. In desperation, she asked another flight attendant if she could help her to calm her worried mind. Unfortunately, the answer was the same. She had to keep her phone off in airplane mode, which meant no calls. She continued her flight fearing the worst. Obviously, this trip felt like the longest one in her life, and she couldn't be sure what she would find when she got home. When she got home, she finally found out what happened to her husband. She discovered that her husband did in fact commit suicide. It could be asked if she could even help him at all since his intentions were clear. He wanted to say goodbye to her knowing she couldn't have helped him. On the other hand, Southwest Airlines stated that their protocol covers some emergency situations which are related to their passengers. Yet this time the passenger was not in any kind of danger, so the emergency protocol wasn't necessary and the phone call couldn't have been made. Let's get back to the Peggy Ewell case. What happened this time? No, she wasn't rude nor aggressive. She didn't have a verbal conflict with a flight attendant, but still, something forced her out of the plane. What do you think it was? We've already mentioned similar cases. Can you guess which one it is? Okay, let's see now. Did her husband send her a message right before she boarded the plane? Maybe this was the case. Well, yes. In this case, there was a problematic phone call, but it wasn't addressed to the passenger herself but to the airline company. Ewell's husband called the airline company to tell them the bad news related to one of their passengers on the flight from Chicago, Illinois to Cleveland, Ohio. Mrs. Ewell knew nothing about the call, and that was why she was so calm and thrilled for the plane to take off. Still, she was removed from it without knowing why at the time. When a stewardess approached Mrs. Ewell, Peggy was clueless about the circumstances her family faced at home. As a good plane traveler, she had her phone off before she boarded, so her husband was desperately trying to tell her the bad news. Since he failed in contacting his wife, he decided it was best to call the airline company and ask them to pass the important info to their passenger named Peggy Ewell, which eventually they did, but not right away. Since he tried several times to reach his wife and every time he failed, Mr. Ewell decided to call Southwest Airlines directly and tell them what his trouble was. He was hoping they would help him since the situation was related to one of their current passengers. When the people from the airline got the message, they immediately contacted the crew of the plane Mrs. Ewell was on. The stewardess contacted the pilot and he took the plane back to the gates. When Mr. Ewell got his message across, he was sure his wife would know what to do. Even the plane captain was sure about his actions. He had to have that woman at the gate so she could make an important call. Still, at the moment the flight attendant reached Mrs. Ewell at her seat, she didn't relay the important message. Instead, she told Mrs. Ewell to leave the plane immediately, which was perhaps a wrong thing to do since Mrs. Ewell was confused. The message Peggy Ewell was supposed to get was that her son had suffered a head injury and was hospitalized. The news was shocking and there wasn't much she could do since she was more than 1,000 kilometers away from Denver, where her son was hospitalized. These are rather devastating news for any parent, especially if a parent is far away from the child, but still, he was in a safe place and the doctors would do anything they could to save his life. That was the most important detail in the whole situation. Since the officials of Southwest Airlines were informed about Peggy's situation, they decided to help her more than they were obliged to. Not many airline companies would do that, right? Upon receiving the horrible news, Peggy was a bit lost, and having spent a lot of her money on a plane ticket, she didn't know how to reach Denver now. She was afraid she couldn't pay for a new ticket to go see her son, and she was devastated. As previously mentioned, Mrs. Ewell believed she didn't have enough money for a new plane ticket, so she was worried. Then she got information that her flight to Denver would take place in 2 hours. As we could read from her interview giving to boardingarea.com, the crew of Southwest Airlines had already booked a plane ticket for her on their flight to Denver. If all airline companies cared this much about their passengers, the world would be a better place. According to Mrs. Ewell's words, the company offered a private waiting area, rerouted my luggage, allowed me to board first and packed a lunch for when I got off the plane in Denver. Pretty amazing, right? What a generous act of kindness. This was the right way to treat a troubled mother. She was so lost that she probably couldn't do it all on her own, and the people from Southwest Airlines treated her like a valued family member. One more thing the company did, according to Mrs. Yule, was that her luggage was delivered to where she was staying, and she even received a call from Southwest asking how her son was doing. What a caring airline company! Or maybe all of this was charged to Mrs. Yule? What do you think? Did the company do all this free of charge, or did they bill her afterward? It would be rather odd if they charged her for services she didn't actually ask for, right? It's not surprising that the only thing Mrs. Yule had on her mind was her hospitalized son, and that's why she didn't even question Southwest Airlines' intentions when they offered her some extra services without mentioning additional costs. Still, when she got a grip of reality, she couldn't stop wondering how much all that help would cost her. After all, Southwest Airlines is not a charity organization but a profitable company, striving to earn as much as possible, which meant no free services. To Mrs. Yule's relief, it turned out the company did give free services, but only on this particular occasion, when this person was in an emergency. It would be great if other airline companies followed the pattern, right? When we now read the statement given on the company's website, we're sure they're telling the truth. The statement says that the mission of Southwest Airlines is the dedication to the highest quality of customer service, delivered with a sense of warmth, friendliness, individual pride, and company spirit. Here, we're not advertising Southwest Airlines, but admiring the fact that one profitable company met the needs of a common person in trouble. That's the fact that has to be talked about and to be given as motivation for other companies to do the same when needed. Additionally, Southwest Airlines also state they don't take their commitments lightly. They're dedicated to doing the right thing, they take great strides to ensure safety and fostering trusting relationships between their employees, customers, suppliers, and the planet. After the incident with Mrs. Yule happened, the spokesperson of Southwest Airlines has talked to the newspaper many times, addressing this particular incident. The company was proud of their actions and they underlined the fact that passengers are their main concern. They said, "This example is a direct reflection of the Southwest Airlines culture. Employees are empowered at Southwest to go above and beyond the call of duty." In another interview given to the press, Southwest Airlines stated their staff would always have the right opportunity to follow their hearts to make decisions that positively impact the customers. They continued the statement saying, "We're certainly proud of any of the hard work that went into doing the right thing for Mrs. Yule and her family." Were you surprised by the Access airline company made? Were you expecting something else? Remember the previous case when that woman was called by her suicidal husband? What happened in the end? If she was traveling Southwest instead, would her husband still be alive? Even though her son was in a serious life-threatening condition, he managed to recover in the end. Still, the whole story didn't cast light on the son, but on the mother's treatment by the airline's company. It seems that the son was somehow forgotten by the media. When interviewed by the website boardingarea.com, Mrs. Yule said, "The care that I was shown is second to none. We've always liked Southwest Airlines and now I can't say enough good things about them."